All right, Wayne, we were just off air talking about how the Baldies are taking over at Manchester United. So not only are you on here, but and you have many strong links to the club, of course. And Omar Berrada, the new incoming CEO, bold. Ten Hag, bold. Patrick Stewart, the outgoing CEO, bold. Mitchell van der Gaag, the assistant manager, bold. Are there any others? Star striker Anthony Martial, bold.
Well, you started so strongly, and then you took a sharp turn.
Yeah.
No, like I was saying off air when you launched into this bold hate crime, you're welcome, because obviously the positive change that is abounding on Manchester United is, like you said, it's all connected to the follically challenged brotherhood, and you're welcome.
Well, you were also saying off air that there's no way you're going to work for that blue bastard. No. It was. So I guess we ought to get into this because it's the big story of the week, isn't it? United being very un-United-like and surprising absolutely everybody with a move, which I think broadly everyone's welcoming. A real football operator coming into the club. And the announcement on manunited.com saying we are going back to putting football first. I was like, wow, Joel did not pen that. So change is afoot.
Yeah. I'm a very cautious speaker, but I found... So there are certain elements with the appointment that I will be cautious on, because you said a couple of... On the pod where we talked about the announcement, and you said things can't be worse, and I said, whoa, they can always get worse. Bringing my usual rate of positivity into it, but with the appointment, I am going to be cautious about it, because how many times have we said that's a sensible decision? With signings, all these kind of things, and they've turned out to be not so. We don't know how it's going to impact, and obviously it's a long time until he's actually in post working, and we'll see the changes. And again, we're looking for instant reaction. I know I will get to one, but when I always sort of say with positions like that, you've got to see sort of 12 to 18 months, and that we're kicking the can further down the line with him, because obviously we've got another 6 months. But the thing what you've just said there with the statement and putting the football club back, the team back at the forefront, was really compelling in a way, because that every word is pointed in these kind of statements. They're very carefully crafted, and to put the term back in was very, very deliberate. It seemed.
Oh yeah.
Seemed very, very deliberate. And when you look at something like that, it tells you a couple of things. The first thing is that obviously the current owners of the club, the majority owners of the club, don't really care that much about how they're perceived anymore, because it's such a broad statement to make in terms of the critical aspects of what it's representing. And the other thing is that it's a really aggressive move from Ratcliffe and Ineos to say something like that. It's carrying on this wind of change. And I think more than anything, more than the person even though I know we'll talk about it, more than the person, the little word, a little 4-letter word can make a massive difference. And I think that's probably my biggest takeaway from it.
Yeah, and I think that's totally fair. I did as soon as I read it, I was like, there's a very broadly worded non-disparagement clause in the sales transaction agreement. It's very broadly worded. And it was one of those ones that I'm going to just assume this was run past Tampa or Washington, and they're in different places, aren't they, the Glazer family, because you could interpret that in a certain way. And, of course, during the sales process, the very lengthy sales process, there were stories, and let's take them with a pinch of salt, because I think a lot of reporting was very bad during this process, as we've now found out. But saying the Glazers were offended by the Qataris saying we're going to put United back at the forefront, and so on and so on and so on, right? So I don't know whether any of that was true, but it didn't half trigger something in my brain when I read it going, this is interesting. But more seriously, I think we're right to be cautious. In the past, I've criticised the club for putting learner drivers in charge of an F1 car, and in a sense we're doing this. Now, he's not a complete learner driver, but he's no more experienced really than Richard Arnold. Now, it may be in a different type of experience, and it is a different type of experience. But he's never had a CEO job before. This will be different. He's been COO of City Football Group for the last 3 years or so, which is a big job. 11 clubs in the stable, and you can kind of see where that might be useful in what might turn out to be a multi-club group at United.
Yeah.
But he's never actually had to run things. He's been seen in some circles, certainly Sam Lee, the City correspondent, was saying he was seen as the heir apparent. So, yeah, fine. He comes with some kudos, but I think a little bit of caution there because he's stepping up into a role he's not had before. And, of course, there's intrigue because he's coming from City and what that represents and so on. But yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, I think it's positive. Just the nature of who he is. He has come from a commercial background, but it was partnerships and moved more into the football operations side of things afterwards. So, with cautious optimism there that this is it's definitely a different direction. And it's outside the circle of Manchester United. And I think clearly we need new ideas into the club. So, we can all feel pretty positive about it. It's not going to change the makeup of the football boards. I mean, it's still going to be Brailsford and Jean-Claude Blanc representing Ineos. So you see already ownership has split themselves from operation, which again I think is positive. You want to put the best actors into the best roles and trust them to empower them to go and do the right thing. Again, this is just standard good practice from world management consulting, which I know very well. So broadly speaking, I feel pretty positive about this. Already the moves, there's the thumbprint of Ratcliffe and Ineos all over it. There's a piece in the Athletic this morning saying they're actually taking a broader view, not just football operations. So clearly we can see that because the CEO of the club overall is not just football operations. So there's change, and boy, if we needed it for a long time. And the other thing I'd say, and it's probably the last piece of praise I'll ever say about the Glazers, but I think they've recognised it. And we saw in the accounts, United are £1.2 billion in debt of various different kinds, some of which is due very soon. Those primary bonds mature in 2027. And then there's the revolving credit matures in 2025. And about 75% of our transfer activity is due in the next 2 years. So there's an awful lot of money about to disappear out of the club. And I think they have recognised that they are not the right people to operate this club now.
Well, you've said, and we have discussed this ever since. We can even go back to, and I'm pretty sure we talked about it at the time with Casemiro and Anthony when we signed them, and it was like, where's that money coming from? That's going to impact the club in the medium to long term. And we were talking about that, and I think realistically, you would have known more than me because you're from the background that you are and the understanding that you are, that this was coming to a head. But we did. It's not something that would be a surprise for anyone listening to this podcast, because we have talked about it before, about how swiftly those things were approaching. And that's why, one of the things that I talked about quite a lot was my nonplussed reaction to Champions League football. Not so much last season. Last season it felt it was critical for a number of different reasons. This season not so much, because of the balance that you've got between the short-term gain and the long-term health. If you didn't get that, it forced a situation where they would have to seek not just investment but cataclysmic changes, which they have done. And that's happened. I will say one of the reactions that I have found funny, predictably, has come from the City aspect of the Manchester Evening News. And there was something I read about why Manchester United's appointment is an implicit understanding that Manchester City are innocent of everything, because it's such a convoluted piece of nonsense that but he went into it, and basically it was kind of like Manchester United fans don't. This was I don't know if it's City's main correspondent, because I don't read it that closely. I don't think it was. Is it Kelso? I don't know if he's his main correspondent for.
Yeah, I don't know.
He may well
Paul
be.
Kelso.
I'm sorry. Yeah, he may be Paul Kelso. And I think it was him who wrote the piece. But I don't know if he's the main correspondent. He's just the person who wrote it. And I'm not picking on him. It's just that he will. Well, I guess I am, but I'm not meaning to. It was just the way that he worded his piece, and it was very clearly stated as an opinion piece and not a facts piece. But his take on it was that Manchester United fans have accused Manchester City with no evidence that they've done anything wrong.
Yeah, right.
But
no evidence.
and then he said, but if they have done something wrong, then won't they look like idiots for taking City's COO? You know, and I thought, first of all, what a strange way to say, don't speculate, because speculating is wrong, but I'm going to speculate, and you should believe this speculation. It's such that part in itself, I mean, yeah, you can say what you want about journalistic standards. That was disappointing to read from the regional newspaper. But that is the wider point, because if you have, I haven't, but I saw someone tweet about this, ventured over to Blue Moon, the widely renowned and beloved Manchester City forum. There was a thread, forum thread that was something like 300 pages on this news alone, and they were all. I dipped in because everyone was saying it was funny. I dipped in and read a few pages, and they were all singing from the same hymn sheet, kind of like United are admitting that we're not culpable for any wrongdoing. And I thought, interesting take. Take.
What I would say on that one is I'm assuming that United have done the due diligence. His name does not appear in any of those emails that Rue Pinto, the Football League Sky, came up with. That is above his pay grade. Also, the core time for the inflated sponsorships was before he had any real power. As I said, he's actually quite new to an executive role. So I'm going to assume that the due diligence has been done there, and this guy doesn't have his fingerprints all over some of the crimes. Now, what were they crimes? Absolutely. I mean, Ceferin, since we're talking about it, the UEFA head said yesterday, and he's a lawyer of long renown. You can debate whether he's a UEFA executive of good renown, but that's another topic. As said, they were sure he was guilty, and Rue Pinto, Football Leaks guy, was saying on Twitter, "Yes, I know, he knows, everyone knows they're guilty," and I think the two things are very separate. I mean, it would be classic old school United to go hire a guy who then gets banned or something like that, but I don't think so. In this case, I assume that he was well away from that. Now, was he part of the executive team that's culpable for some of the later FFP infractions where they've spent too much? And there are two very different groups of charges against Manchester City, and they do align, right? So one of them is absolute, rampant conspiracy to lie and cheat and break the rules. So that's the one block. And that's most of the charges, the 115. And the second block are around the actual breaching of the limits, the financial limits, and they kind of do go together. Now, he may well have, in a football operations sense, some kind of culpability around the breaching of the FFP limits, of which they've been found guilty twice, by the way, and there's a block of potentially more guilt to come. So the second piece is slightly different, right? Because the club as a whole gets punished, not individuals. The first piece, which is the conspiracy to defraud, basically, that's really serious. That's really serious. Yeah. And that's where all the emails from the lawyers, from the general manager, from Abu Dhabi have all been exposed. You can go read about them in Der Spiegel or the Football Leaks. I don't suppose that website's live anymore since he went to prison. You can go read all of that. It's all in the public domain now. If you read all of that and then conclude that there was no guilt there, you've got a very creative mind, I'd say. Anyway, this will play out, but I would be extremely surprised if Berrada is caught up in this in any way. Let's just say that. So,
I'm with you. I'm glad that you explained it in a very digestible way. I just thought it was amusing to see, amusing and predictable, obviously, to see that would be their response when like you said, some of the evidence is so plain that it's embarrassing if you miss it, especially if you're a Manchester City correspondent.
Yeah. Well, look, part of we now know part of the sports washing playbook is, and I take that in the broadest possible term, not just the reputational piece, but part of it is to weaponize the fans. And, part of the reason I was a little bit suspicious about whether the Qatari bid would ever come to fruition, although I think, I definitely some cognitive dissonance here, but part of the reason I was suspicious about that is that you can't play the playbook in quite the same way. Yes, United fans are sort of desperate, for success, but not in the same way that Newcastle and City fans were. And you can't just build and take everyone along for the ride in the way that Newcastle and City are playing. So the Newcastle playbook is the City playbook. It's just that the Premier League clubs have got wise after City executed on their strategy and gone, well, you can't make up sponsors because you have to run everything by us. They can't be of inflated value, and you can only spend what you make within broad limits. And it means that Newcastle can't do what City did in exactly the same way. They're doing different things. Like they've got their stable of 4 PIF-owned clubs in Saudi, plus 4 who are owned by companies that are owned by Saudi. Funny, that's never mentioned. 8 of the 12 clubs are Saudi-owned, basically. And that's a ready pool of clubs just go buy Newcastle players at inflated fees.
Yeah.
Some people may say, I couldn't possibly say that, of course. So.
Almiron is the latest.
Yeah, it looks like he's the latest. Yeah.
Well, we can talk about them next time we play them because we've given them enough airtime in the past. But yeah,
that's right.
I do enjoy the idea that it's not as transparent as it obviously is. The idea that, like I said, through the pursuit of sports washing, you have this core element of supporters, of passionate supporters of whether or not we dislike them, and I guess we do. Manchester City is a club, and Newcastle is a football club. They are traditionally very well supported clubs, right? So we're talking like over 30,000 gates, and even for all we want to mock them for empty stadiums and like for 1,000,002 fans who were stood on the hill at Ewood Park, City are a traditionally well supported club. By the comparison of what well supported means, and Newcastle obviously are. Yeah. To see that many people, and we all know because we've all experienced it. If you've talked about football online, to see when you've posted something common sense about this, and see that many people defend it in a way that's so irrational, is already having consequences. It's funny to see Newcastle hamstrung in the way because I feel like there's a few. Like Forest and Everton coincide in that mea culpa. I know it pertains to their own individual cases and their own cooperation and punishments and everything like that. But I do think that maybe there's like a little devil in there to sort of say like, well, we're cooperating, we're the ones saying do everything because City's pushing this out and lack of cooperation is going to be it already is telling, and Newcastle, because of everything that's happening, can't operate in the same way, which is why you're seeing this desperation to get the players all going to Saudi. And it's bad for the game, but it's good for the game. It's necessary. It's like lancing a boil, and this is a boil. It's a massive stain on the game. And if this is what we have to endure, this kind of nonsense. For like this, Newcastle fans think that they've been outdone by because they can't sell Almiron for 900,000 million to refund like a massive overhaul of the squad.
There's and so do Everton fans and Forest fans, by the way. But it's the thing that people don't get about FFP, they like the Everton fans, and in fact, Andy Burnham, Mayor of Manchester, have framed it as some kind of conspiracy against their club, but. That's not what FFP is, or profit and sustainability, as it's called. They admitted their guilt by filing the accounts, right? If they wanted to challenge their guilt, they should have cooked the books. But they filed the accounts. The accounts are black and white. The magical thing about numbers is, sure, you can interpret it, but the rules were breached. Everything after that is up for debate, right? So within the power of the way the Premier League has constructed it with these independent commissions and the open-ended nature of the punishments available. Now, that was for the clubs to decide whether, as part of their the rules of membership, and it's a members club, whether, it was for the clubs to decide how that punishment framework was constructed. They decided together, 20 of them, or at least 14 who would vote for it, that they would leave the independent commission to decide guilty or not guilty. And in fact, you have to self-confess your own guilt, basically, in PSR rules. And then they'd leave the punishment open-ended. There was a recommended framework around points deductions for every 10 million of breach. Recommended. It didn't have to be. But the fact that the fans are going, oh, there's a conspiracy against us, is total and utter nonsense. It's total nonsense, and just kind of, couldn't be so far out of the reality and truth of how the rules are constructed. But fans being fans, everyone's against them, right? So United fans would be the same, by the way. If we got found guilty for a breach, we'd all be, but it's just not like that. Now, we can have an argument and a debate about whether points deductions should be the right thing or it should be financial, and what the punishment should be for City when they're inevitably found guilty. There's a good debate to be had about that, but the framework is there for the Premier League as a collective to go decide. It's like if you joined a golf club and they said you have to wear a jacket to have dinner, and you go, no, I'm not wearing a jacket. But when you walked in the door without the jacket on, you were guilty of breaking the rules, right? So don't complain about it. You broke the rules. Now, you may not like it. Don't join the club. I think, as I put on City, on Twitter, everyone complaining about the rules they signed up to. You sign up to the rules, or you fuck off. I mean, it's an order of magnitude more complicated, City, because there are obviously the 115 charges, and they're grouped into these kind of two blocks. The conspiracy and the fraudulent stuff, and the financial stuff, and it's obviously going to be very difficult for the Premier League to work their way through that, especially since City have taken on this kind of mantra of non-cooperation and litigated absolutely everything. I mean, they spent 4 years in court, which often isn't talked about. And they're challenging absolutely everything. The framework, whether the rules can be enforced, the punishment framework, whether the Premier League have jurisdiction over this, everything. So, magical stuff, isn't it? All right. All right. Well, it's a new dawn for United, and hey, personally, I don't think multi-club ownership groups are healthy for football either. And I'm sure this is something we come to over time with United, who are at the dawn of a multi-club ownership model. It's not really there yet, but given that Ineos have functional control, or Ratcliffe does, and Ratcliffe has functional control over Ineos, it basically is. Right, so, and UEFA will take a view on this at some point, and they may have to have different management teams in place as a result. But we'll come back to this, I'm sure. I don't think it's healthy for football. I don't think it's healthy for football to have private equity involved in football in such a strong way. And there's more than 70 clubs now have some kind of private equity money throughout Europe. And I definitely don't think it's healthy for state clubs. Unfortunately, I think the horse has bolted, and we're not shutting the door on any of these things just at the moment. There you go.
What next?
What next? So we've got the ownership stuff out of the way. Should we talk a little bit about the women's team and then get on to Newport at the weekend?
Yeah. Well, this is you're talking about multi-club ownership, and I guess the exploitation of the brand over different regions. I would be surprised. Don't worry, I'm coming to the women's. We've moved on to this topic. I'd be surprised if United go down that avenue. Surprised. I don't know. I just think because United's brand is so powerful to itself, that to give it away to, let's say, Melbourne United would be a curious one for me. I just couldn't see it, because I think the power is in the exclusivity, but I don't know. That stands to reason. But the point is, especially when there's something in their own backyard that can fairly operate under that brand and deserves to carry the name, is so woefully underfunded as the women's team have been. And I don't want to put on repeating the same things I said last time we talked about this, but I think what we're seeing now is it's like squeezing of the toothpaste tub in it. You know, like earlier we were talking about, on the last time we were talking about the women's team, we were talking about the difficulties that they've got with the funding. But there's a mirror of the first team, the men's team, with this, because Mark Skinner, obviously, everyone knows what a great job he's done from the start. And it is a little bit like Ten Hag, that to a certain extent, you look at everything that he's achieved, and you commend him for that. Then you look at the balance of the credit that he's got in the bank, and even taking into account the struggle that he's had, and then wondering, has that magic gone? Is it difficult? Is it going to be too difficult for him to turn it around from the position that he's got with the funding that he's got at the moment? And are United, is Mark Skinner, is everyone better making a clean break of it? Not like right now, I'm not saying anything as drastic as that, but are we looking at something that looks like it's time for a change? And I feel like I'm not a big fan, as you know, of advocating for changing managers, but you look at this and it's difficult to find a conclusion other than that, because it just feels like it's like the vibrancy's gone from it. Do you know what I mean? Like there was such,
for sure, yeah.
Even getting to the final last season, there was such a powerful vibrancy, and I feel like the idea of wanting to kick on from that and not being able to kick on from that, and the struggle that they've had, sooner or later that struggle wears people down, and it wears them down to the point, and I'm talking in an environment, not just Mark Skinner, an environment where you think the change is probably for the best for everyone. And my hope is, and I'm talking like, we're talking after the very disappointing result at Chelsea, and it was this is the point, is that Chelsea, it looked like a result waiting to happen, and it did happen, and it looked like it was like a result waiting to happen in the way they did, that Chelsea were going to exert dominance and look much, much stronger. And we were hoping to see United over this year make progress, so they could stand toe to toe with them, and and have a good game with them. But they looked further apart from them in the weekend's game than they did in the cup final. Yeah, and that's the concern for me, because then I think, like, and I know you can look at Russo, you can look at the Herb situation and say, yeah, we can understand that, but he still doesn't make it right. Do you know what I mean? Like with Ten Hag, he's still not going to make it right. If he's gone in the wrong direction and you can't get it back, then it is time to make that change. And I think that's unfortunately where we are with Skinner. And I my hope is that there's something that he can do, like this backs to the wall mentality, and sort of galvanise some unity within, and I'm sure it's there. I'm sure it can be done. So that's what I'd like to see from that. It just looked very, very difficult at the minute.
Well, they've lost what they had last season was a real defensive solidity, and they've lost that this season. And the golfing class at the weekend against Chelsea was very apparent, but also in the match a month ago against City as well. There was a big golfing class then, and I think it's 7 points to the Champions League place. It's too much to make up in what is a much shorter season in the women's game. So United won't be in Europe next season, no secondary competition. So it is a step backwards. And there's context, of course. And there was a heavy symbolism in Lauren James scoring a hat-trick, for sure. And we could definitely go, okay, she always wanted to go to Chelsea. Her brother's there. She wanted to be back in London. And you can say that Ona Bache was always going to go back to Barcelona, and that's why we lost her. And you can say, well, they didn't make the financial offer to Russo before she'd committed to Arsenal. That may well be true, right? There's good excuses, but also they all point to the club the women's side not being run in quite the same way, not being resourced anywhere near the men's game, the men's team. And you can also say, yeah, at some point there's a tipping point, and if you're going to lose half your games, or there's quite a few losses and a lot of draws this season, if you're going to fail to win half your games, especially with a number of mid-ranked teams, so outside of City, Arsenal, and Chelsea, also being quite ambitious in the women's game, then United may well go backwards, and that's what it feels like. The team has gone backwards. There's a lot of frustration amongst fans who are there every week, and the support for the team is fantastic. But there's a lot of frustration amongst those fans. A lot of frustration with Skinner, who doesn't seem to use his squad quite in a way, and maybe he doesn't trust his players, but he doesn't use his squad. And United brought in 8 players in the summer. Maybe a lot of them were punts and not quite as good as we thought they were. There's been some unfortunate, Misawa has been injured a lot. I think Gazer has shown her undoubted quality without really scoring the goals. Mallard has scored the goals, but not always been in the team. Some of the defensive players may have gone backwards. There's been a lot of things you could kind of point to. But, unfortunately, we're probably in an environment where there'll be a change. I don't know who that would be in the summer. I wonder whether they could convince Laura Harvey to come back from the States, being one of the sort of, top names in coaching. She's at OL Reign near me, actually. But who knows? Just speculating on that one. But, the whole operation, I'm sure, I'm going to assume the focus of the Ineos team is on fixing the men's team and the club structurally, but there's going to be a view on, do we have the right facilities for the women? There is that new building. Could there be better facilities? Undoubtedly. What kind of budget does the women's team have? It's quite healthy in women's terms, but it could be more. It's very easy to dial it up if United want to invest more. Do they have the right resources? They have a much smaller operations team, so scouting and general manager. There is a director of football for the women's team, but much smaller team and nowhere near the 150 scouts or something that are employed by the men's operation. And then is the coach right? And I assume if they're going to look at that in the same way they've done with the men's side, is they look at it from the top down. Do we have the right people in place structurally? And then we'll work our way down to coaching and players.
Yeah.
And so as a result, we may well get some changes.
I agree with that. I mean, it's funny to see, not funny, it's curious in the interest of an observer in the sport, right? So to see the differences, obviously, that are obvious in the men's and women's game, how much of it comes down to budget. But in a fledgling sport, which this still is, in terms of the Women's Premier League and the recency of that, I mean, obviously I know it's been around for generations, and I'm talking about the recency of the Women's Premier League and United's relative newness to that as well. You are, in the men's game, we can sit here and we can talk about trends and we can say, well, there should be patience because of the injury crisis. We could talk about, like I've done ad nauseum, unfortunately for you, over the course of the season, where you can talk about the peaks and troughs and you can analyse trends, and you've got a good background of being able to analyse why these trends are important, because there's a really good track record of evidence that suggests what the outcome will be. Not always guaranteed, that's why we love football. In the women's game, what makes it so compelling and different at the moment is, first of all, like you said, the supporters are getting frustrated because they want to see fast-moving evidence of progress. Now, normally I would sit here and say, no, supporters should have a longer-term view on that. I don't think so in this case, because there's no longer routes, there's no big oil tanker to turn around. The problem is the lack of resources. So they've got every right to look at the Ratcliffe and Ineos situation, demand greater, like I said, operational resources, which is what we'll talk about on that regard. The other thing is, it's somewhat tied to Russo and the defensive losses that we had over the summer. But the secondary issue there is that there's such a big turnover of squads in the women's game that extreme changes in results and performances can only be expected. Now that's cross-gender sport. There's no cross-sex, sport. That there's nothing unique about that, because if you turn over players in such a way that there's no consistency within the squad, you can't generate a proper consistency of performance and result, and you are going to get a massive differential and that's what we've seen with the United women's team this season. And you do tend to see that with a lot of women's teams, is that because they tend to have high turnover of players, they can't generate that level of consistency. So from that aspect and from that perspective, it's easy to empathise with and I'm not one. I'm certainly not one, so I can't preach to those hardcore supporters who go week in, week out, when they go around the country following the team. But I can definitely empathise with their point of view in saying that they're frustrated because they want to see progress. Because in the short term, Manchester United still has a powerful brand name that they should have been, and they were capitalising on, because I think they were capitalising on that to keep Russo and other players for as long as they have, like Toon, the very popular players who love United. They've capitalised on the brand to be able to have these very marketable players around, but they're not moving forward with that. It's kind of like they're using, it felt like for maybe the last 2 years that they were using that to get to elevate themselves. But when it's become time for the players themselves to have a stage, the club stood still because of the lack of resources that we've talked about in the past. And the things that we've seen that are common in the women's sport, United are dealing with in a hard way at the moment, and they shouldn't be, because they should expect better. At this moment in time, they should have expected better over the last 18 months. They've got every right to expect better. The progress we can see is more down to that lack of resource than it is the management. But either way, it always, again, across the sectors, it always comes back down to the manager. The manager will ultimately buy the bully at the end of the day.
Well, yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. Short term, there's a question around Mary Earp's contract. It seems like she's just going to run it down and leave for a bigger opportunity. And in a sense, you can't really blame her, really. This is going to be her last contract. Contracts in women's football are getting more healthy because there's more money coming into the game, but they're nothing like the men's. She's not going to be set up for the rest of her life in any sense, and it's hard to blame her to, if she's going to go get a nice healthy payday, right? It's really hard to blame her. Maybe the club are planning for it with Fallon Tullis-Joyce. Maybe not. We've hardly seen her. I think she's played in a couple of games. So, don't know. But yes, it's an easy, in a sense, it's easy to fix. We are going to get, with more money coming into the women's game, we're going to get slightly longer contracts, so there's more stability coming. It's not there yet. There is still high turnover. As I said, I think it was 8 players United signed in the summer, 8 or 9.
Yeah.
But we're going to get a bit more stability, and it's quite easy to dial up investment because it doesn't cost the club overall anything in FFP terms. There are mechanisms you can use to boost your women's budget, like licensing fees and so on, in order to, and it's like $5.5 million the budget is, so it's not exactly going to strain the club, given that we just chucked 35 million out the door in interest payments this year. So it's an easy one to dial up, but as I said, I think I'll look at it top down and go, okay, how many resources do we need to make this a club that a team that really challenges, and is there value in it? I hate to bring it back to money, but there is value in it because the women's game is growing and as we've seen, can be extremely popular. New TV deal in the UK. There's expansive coverage over here in the States of women's football, now part of DAZN or DAZN. DAZN. Atta Football was brought up, and NBC show WSL games. There's talk about the Champions League expanding, or even a secondary UEFA competition going to happen in the women's game. So you can kind of see there's opportunity there, both to be successful and to make money. And United should be in a very good position to go and leverage that, because one of the biggest brands in football, and there's the gap between United women and the top of the women's game and United men and the top of the men's game is less substantial, even if it looks not that great this year. I think the ability to bridge it is easier. So there's a great opportunity for United to go if the new ownership are willing to do it.
There's the other thing to consider with that, just to add on the end of that, is that there's only the women's game isn't going to go backwards from this point. So there's going to be, you would say, in the next generation at least 2 accelerations of popularity. When they come, I don't know, but like after a major tournament, you'll get a massive surge in popularity. The obvious place where that's going to happen is in the English Women's Premier League, because that's where most of the eyes are for the men's game. It makes so much sense for United to invest in this, because they should be at the forefront of it, and they still, like you said, the bridge isn't that great to build, and they should be at the forefront of it. There's no reason why they shouldn't. The opportunity is there, and that, there's every reason to believe, while we're being optimistic about the direction of the men's team, it's not going to get neglected. It's just going to need nous, and hopefully that's not going to, the actual, we'll talk about nous in the new CEO and everything like that. Very clever decision. Hopefully they'll get best in class for the women's team as well, and drive that forward, because it can't afford neglect over the next 5 years, because we're at the precipice of something really good with the women's sport, and United can't afford to be left behind. I don't think they will be. I just think it's a difficult moment in time, and like I said, it's easier to theoretically it's easier to get there.
All right. Before we go, there's a cup game at the weekend against Newport. I know the FA Cup has over the years seemed to become less important, but I think this is absolutely the perfect type of fixture for the FA Cup. This is what it should be all about. Obviously at the end of the day, a Premier League club is going to win the FA Cup, and it'll probably be one of the big boys. But an away trip to a League Two side, absolutely perfect. It's been a long time since United have had this kind of fixture as well.
Yeah. But this is where I now go into our history with Newport. So you'll be relieved.
Yeah.
You'll be very relieved, because that's my part over.
Yeah, first time we played them. 7,500 people, so it's a small ground, and they're kind of interesting history, Newport, because they've sort of been reborn twice. They were founded and then they went bust in the late 80s. Were refounded as a Phoenix club, fan owned, and they just sold out fan ownership to a single owner, because I think they were struggling to make the ends meet as a fan owned club. So now Hugh Jenkins, who was the owner of Swansea for a while, is now the owner of Newport, and so it's a sort of new dawn. Whether that's good or not, I don't know. We'll see. That's about what I gathered from the conversation. In terms of the team, obviously United are going to spank them, but I think as you've said, I say obviously, so maybe I should remove the word obviously, hopefully.
Yeah.
But as you said, this team does tend to play down to the level of the opponent quite a lot. So I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't expect a Chelsea Middlesbrough style shellacking and it be a comfortable victory, but no more than that.
Yeah, I do think you're probably right with that. Like, you'd like to see a show put on. Everyone wants to see the team win by 4 or 5 goals or more than that in an environment and an occasion like this. But it is away from home. It's football being what it is, and my cautious disposition being what it is, I would normally be here saying, the cup's the cup, and it's United are still in a tricky stage, but sometimes there are chasms that are so great that the point is that if Newport beat us, it will be a sensational upset. So you do have to treat it in that regard. So you want, really, and I won't let Newport supporters down with this. What Newport supporters want is a little bit of overconfidence from Manchester United, because they want their victory to be sweeter by us predicting big wins. Really,
Yeah.
that's the romance of the cup. And so really we should be expecting United in any shape or form. And not, by the way, I was looking up not United's history with Newport, but United's history in the FA Cup since the turn of the century. And guys, like a Manchester United team with Rooney and Ronaldo went to Burton Albion, played against Exeter at Old Trafford, and we had to go to replays in those games. Like we have had some dismal cup ties with much better teams. So nothing is surprising, but you would expect this United team to effectively do what they did against Wigan, which is do enough to keep them at arm's length, have enough quality in there that the result will be comfortable, and yet still have something about the performance that makes you disappointed. And I don't know, not anticlimactic, but things like, Bruno going down so easily for a penalty. Yes, it was a penalty. Yes, all that palaver. It was a penalty, but it was a bit silly. The fact that we only won by 2 when there's that kind of lack of conviction about them. And that's, unfortunately, it's endemic in this Manchester United team that that lack of conviction is so prominent across everything that they do in terms of their ability to do anything in any competition. And that is why we talk about this levelling up and levelling down, is because they don't.
Yeah.
They have this belief that, as I sounded like Drogo's wife from Rocky IV, they have this belief that they are so much better than what they are. But they do. Like, there's this belief that they are a Manchester United worthy team, and I'm not here to say that they're not worthy enough to play for the club, but we're talking about worth of winning titles. And they know that, the players know that, because the proof is in the pudding, as we've said many times. But they still have the confidence of a team that has won medals that they haven't won. And that the disparity there is evident when they can't put a team like Wigan away. They play like a team who's beating Wigan 5-0, but they're not beating them 5-0. And so that's exactly the same kind of team that we're going to see against Newport. The same kind of performance, no matter who's on the pitch, unfortunately, because there's still too many. There's an imbalance in the number of players that we can play with that attitude.
Yeah.
And,
well, it would be nice, wouldn't it, if we had a bunch of younger players on the pitch? And that's not disrespectful of Newport. It's just I don't think younger players play like that, right? They're hungry and
exactly,
they want to win. They've got something to prove. But unfortunately, that we won't see that many because, well, 2 reasons. One, Ten Hag doesn't really like to do it. They've all gone. 3 reasons. Ten Hag doesn't really like doing it. They've all left. The players who like Hannibal and Dangor, and there's so many injuries anyway that it's going to be quite a strong team. Like whatever way, the squad's just not. It can't stretch far enough. I mean, I suppose maybe we'll see Omar Berrada, who's been on the bench in recent times.
Yeah.
And, people at youth level really like him. There's a question mark around his contract and whether he's going to stay at the club. And also, I think, a new dawn in how United think about younger players. If they're not going to, if they don't believe they're going to make it, they're going to try and sell them earlier. Seems to be the philosophy now. Well, we'll see how that plays out. But, anyway, I think we'll see quite a strong side. There's not a lot of scope for it not being, and how that'll play out. Well, we'll see. But I suspect you're probably right about this is not a killer side. One player we're not going to see is Anthony Martial, who's had a groin injury and is out for another 10 weeks. He appears to have been out for the last 10 weeks. He's had this mystery illness. I don't know whether that was a groin injury or what. We were never told. He was just, quote unquote, ill. And now we know exactly how ill he is. So I try to count it out. 10 weeks from now is February, March, beginning to middle of April. He takes quite a long time, so I suspect longer, and he takes a long time to kind of get ready. Historically, he's said when he thinks he's ready, so probably more like end of April, beginning of May. And you start to get into the question mark of, right, will he ever play for the club again because he's out of contract in the summer? So here we go. Big prediction from you, Wayne. Will Anthony Martial play for United again? And do you want him to? You want a farewell game? Testimonial.
Is he closer? I'm trying to think. 2 years from, 1 year from a testimonial.
What year did he join? Again?
15, 16.
15, 16.
He's a year away.
Wow.
I have predicted. Like I predicted, not predicted. I didn't feel that there was any way he could play for the team again after the Bournemouth game. I couldn't see it happening, and it happened. So I can't see him playing for the club again. So I'm predicting that he will. So that's the first thing. The secondary thing is that how that impacts the game of the weekend is that Højlund will probably start. He'll undoubtedly go start and hopefully score a few goals. But Ten Hag has to use that game because there's no two ways around it. He has to use that game to find an alternative to Højlund. So you're probably going to give him 45, 50, maybe an hour. You have to try something completely different for that last half an hour in terms of the front player. Not Rashford, because he said that he doesn't like playing there. So if it's Folsom, if it's another solution like playing a false nine or something with the, because we've got inside, like players from the outside to come in, he has to do that. Like that's not even. I wouldn't have even thought that there's any other consideration that he has to do that, because that's become such an emergency. And he doesn't look, unless the silly stories are true about either Chapu, is it Chapu or Choupo? And or Benzema.
No.
Discounting the fact that we bring someone in, we've got to find a solution. So I would predict, that's the only thing I can't predict with any certainty about Martial, unfortunately. I would think that his time has probably been up for 2 or 3 years back. That only leads me to believe he'll probably play again because Ten Hag has done that. But the strongest prediction I've got out of it is that surely the emphasis for most of the second half on Sunday is going to be, is it Sunday when United play? The emphasis has got to be United finding an alternative to what's happening in the front line.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, you're right. They need one because form, fitness with Højlund and United are really screwed. So, I mean, we've got a week left of the transfer window. Maybe they'll look to do a loan. I can't imagine they're going to spend a load of money on it. It seems the noises are more around exits at the moment. See whether that happens or not. But yeah, there are no options, basically, other than Højlund and Rashford, who, as you say, doesn't want to play there. So. I mean, Joe Hugill, who would have been one of the options, gone out on loan. So it's there aren't even youth options, really. Mm-hmm. I wonder whether we'll see Casemiro and Martinez. They both need minutes. This is a good game to give them some minutes. I don't doubt either would play 90. They've had a lot of training recently, but obviously not a lot of games. Big question mark around whether Luke Shaw's ready. I don't think Mason Mount is yet, and Harry Maguire definitely isn't. Who else? Victor Lindelof's still out. Back problem? Thigh problem? Both problems. Can't remember now. It's whatever. He's broken. So I mean, it's really Casemiro and Martinez we'll be looking at to see whether they get some minutes. If only with Casemiro to show that he still has value. They're trying to flog him to Saudi, which they may or may not be. I don't know. So,
well, if Almiron is worth 80 million, then Casemiro is going to be worth about 160 million. So
yes, please. I
still like him. I'm surprised he didn't play any minutes against Spurs that we went with.
He was on the bench, wasn't he?
Yeah. Well, surprise, not surprise again. But yeah, I would expect him and Martinez to start because it's a cup. It's the only thing we can win. So. They've got to get minutes. So, from that perspective, it's going to be. It is nice to, well, jokes aside and everything like that. It's nice to see, nice to take on a new team that we don't have any history with. It's nice for that. It's nice for the FA Cup to bring that up. Yeovil a few years ago was one, wasn't it, that we hadn't played before.
Yeah.
So it is
I think
nice
that's the
to
last
get-
time we had a proper lower leagues kind of team in the cup, isn't it? I mean, it wasn't that Alexis Sanchez's debut or one of his first games, anyway. Yeovil.
Good grief.
Didn't
Was
he
it?
score in that one?
No, I remember
I feel like-
Herrera scored a great goal.
Herrera scored. Did Sanchez score the other one? I can't remember. I remember him like thinking, "Oh yeah, this is pretty good game debut," like early in his time, and us all getting excited about it. Anyway, what a time to be alive!
Yes, well,
Alexis Sanchez at Yeovil.
No. I actually, you underestimate me, Mr. Ed.
Never. I would
You
never do such a
underestimate
thing.
me because I have a prescient reminder every year, and it came around recently. The Sanchez story came up on, and I put on my time up, well, on my Facebook at the time, and Time Up reminds me all the time, every year, that I wasn't sure about him from the start. I'm like, At the time, it was, the reason why was because Martial and Rashford were playing from the left, and they were playing quite well together. So like they were the one time that Martial was motivated to do something when they had competition, and that was the moment. And then we had a little bit more competition and all that. And way off track there. Back to Newport. It's nice to play a team that we've not played before in the cup. It's nice to, like I said, like when you learn something about a new team's history, and like you actually establishing a relationship with them, a connection. There is an history there now. That, and you won. I won because we got too many clubs with this really pathetic rivalry, and the rivalries can be about nothing. Like Sunderland in 2012. Suddenly they didn't like us, so they started celebrating. There was no historic rivalry there. Why create one?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah,
but
Stoke fans used to do the same thing.
yeah, it's just
So
like why? It's because obviously it's because United and they want to antagonise it, and there's a big travelling support and everything like that. But you do find all of those clubs generally describe United as the best travelling support. They still like United coming to town. Newport, they're gonna like that.
yeah, all right.
It's gonna be good.
We'll leave it there. Good luck at the weekend, lads, and good luck to the new team of Baldies that are in charge of United. Barton, Brailsford, Berrada, Ten Hag.
You should have just
Vandergaard.
gone Ben Bog and it's carried on with the B.
Yeah, I
Is
should
it-
just made up some names and everyone would be, yeah.
There's is it Phone Jacker going way back in the archives for Phone Jacker? Was it Phone
Yep.
Jacker? He did the thing where the guy who just says bees, I'll have to find, someone will tag me in the tweet with it, but there was a guy,
Nice.
a character in it. He just said bees on the phone or something like that, and yeah, so you were doing such a good job until you got to Ben Bog, but yeah, you had to say it properly. So.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks a lot for listening, everyone, and we'll catch you again next time.